instead of the families, being the primary decision maker for families, you have people like James Dwyer, who you were quoting a second ago, William and Mary College. I think he's also affiliated with Harvard University, who
Yes.
said that the state confers legal
Right.
parenthood. And it's this idea that your children essentially belong to the government, not to you and not to the families, which is totally ludicrous. And I think most people think that's ridiculous. A little fun fact on James Dwyer is in 2014, I believe he wrote a paper that's on Social Science Research Network. I think it's the Alabama Law Review it's published in. But he actually made a crazy argument, in my view, it's crazy, that if families are in a quote unquote unsafe neighborhood, he argues that the state should be able to come in and take their children away from them. And if they want to keep their children, well, then they have to move to a safe neighborhood that they define as a safe neighborhood. So who is this going to, most likely negatively affect? And it's essentially, the government. It's a way for the government to come in and take children away from
Mm,
disadvantaged families because the elites can say, oh, well, this doesn't seem like a safe neighborhood to me. We're going to take your child away. Literally was proposed in this 2014 Alabama Law Review paper by James Dwyer. And I also
wow.
want to point out something well, look, the statement by Elizabeth Bartlett that, homeschooling is quote unquote authoritarian is just beyond parody because her proposal to ban homeschooling using government force is the very definition of authoritarianism. It's using
Right.
government power to take away our individual liberties, our rights that do not come from the government. They're inherent, they pre-exist the government. So that is the definition of authoritarianism. And if you look at, historically speaking, a lot of authoritarian regimes actually had similar proposals to ban homeschooling. In Germany in 1938, the Nazi regime actually did ban homeschooling for families, and also you had groups like the KKK in the United States in 1922 pushed to ban private education altogether, and they did so successfully until the Supreme Court thankfully came down in 1925 in the case Pierce versus Society of Sisters, where the leading justice famously said that the child is not the mere creature of the state. More people should realize that that is the case today, that the
Hmm.
child does not belong to the government. They're not the mere creature of the state. And look, so we've seen some pretty negative groups pushing to outlaw homeschooling before. And in Germany, they still have that law on the
Right.
books. Families are not allowed to homeschool. So I think we're lucky in the United States that we don't have oppressive governments like that taking away that right away from our children. I will say, Elizabeth Bartlett actually did an extraordinary self-own if you compare two of her videos together, because she calls to ban homeschooling for a lot of different reasons. One thing is about the Christians and conservatives homeschooling their children and her quote unquote indoctrination that she's talking about. But another argument she tries to use is that, well, we've seen some cases of abuse in the home. And so since there are some rare cases of abuse, we should punish 100% of families, regardless of whether they're doing a good job or not, or abusing their children or not. And so she argues essentially that everybody should be guilty until proven innocent, and that we should punish everybody for the bad actions of a few negative actors. So she uses these rare cases of abuse to take away the rights of 100% of the population. So that's what she says today. That's what she argues today. But back in 2014, she was caught, or I caught her. I found this video on Russia Today. Is the interviewer, the live interview she did with, and it was about international adoption. And the interviewer from Russia Today was arguing against international adoption. She said we shouldn't do this because look, there's these rare cases of abuse that we found in this study in this household here and there, and so we shouldn't allow anybody to adopt children because sometimes there's abuse. Elizabeth Bartlett correctly responded that we shouldn't use the exception to prove the rule. We shouldn't use these
Hmm.
rare cases of abuse to ban international adoption for everyone.
Interesting.
And she even got so upset that the interviewer was using this rhetoric, using the, kind of generalizing from extreme cases of abuse, to where she threatened the interviewer and said, I'm going to leave the interview if you continue using these rare cases to try to justify your policy position. But that's exactly what she's doing today. So when you show those two
Wow.
video clips right next to each other, it's an extraordinary self-own by 2014 Elizabeth Bartlett, owning the logic, quote unquote logic, of 2020 Bartlett.